The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
On her LinkedIn profile, Candace Giesbrecht describes herself as a remote performance coach, a strategic HR consultant, a mentally healthy workplaces champion, a word lover, and a community builder. Candace is the director of the Remote Performance Academy with teamit.com. Teamit is the leader in modern talent strategy, helping growth-focused companies recruit, cultivate, and sustain high-performing remote teams. It was interesting to hear how Candace described connection as survival, as she, her husband, who happens to be my cousin Brent, and teenage son live in the beautiful Okanagan Valley, which has been hit hard by fires, floods, and landslides this year. Her perspective is a valuable one, as she has learned to not only connect to survive throughout her life, but has adapted this concept to her work with teams and leaders. We're all about connection first here at Candy, and I'm confident Candace will give you some new and inspiring insight on why connections are really at the heart of great teams. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Connector Next Door. And I have a connector that I have known for many, many years that is going to be joining me today. Welcome here, Candace. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thanks, Lisa. Happy to be here.
Got family all over the place. And Candace, you and I are related through marriage. And my great cousin Brent, who teased me a lot when I was younger.
I bet he did. Yeah.
But we had so much fun, and I'm sure I got old enough that I was teasing him back. But you're married to Brent, and it's just been so amazing to reconnect. Not just on a family level, but on a professional level, where I am learning more about your heart, about the work that you do, and how you connect people together.
Yeah. I feel the same, Lisa. I heard a speaker a long time ago say just how valuable it is to have a person in your life where there's the you too, me too, right? And right. So you too, me too, right?
Totally.
And so I felt that with you, not only is there this family connection, but there are these crossovers that happen in our professional lives as well.
I'm learning more about where you're coming from as a coach and as an HR professional, but I do want to start with a pretty simple question. If you were to put your thoughts around what connection means, what does connection mean to you?
Yeah, that sounds like a simple question, but I feel like we could go in so many different directions with that, and so what connection means to me is it's survival, it's mental health, it's the strength of a community, it's our tools, our processes, it's the places we gather and the ways that we gather. And so, what connection means to me is also different than what connection means to my husband or to, my son. And I think, certainly what we've experienced as a society is just, what kinds of connection are most important to us and how do we achieve that? And certainly within the work that I do, how do we leverage what we do have when we're faced with what we might not have access to anymore? And, you and I have talked a lot about how much we relied historically on our physical places of gathering to provide those connections for us. We've had to find new ways or perhaps old ways of connecting in order to make meaningful connection. I was thinking about how much I used to rely on going to church, like to just touch in with lots of people that I know or people that I care about. And, it was really convenient, honestly, like to just sort of, in the space of a couple of hours, I could check in with 20 different people. And so if those people are really important to me, then I've had to start picking up the phone, or I've had to start, even emailing or checking in order to keep some of those relationships alive.
And what's interesting even about that example, and you're living in BC. So for those of you that are listening from around the world, British Columbia has been through a lot this last year with natural disasters, changes in weather and the environment, and everything from fires to floods and landslides. And that has affected you, Candace, even where you're living. And when you talk about connection isn't necessarily just about the physical space. And you're talking about what does that mean to you and your husband and your son, and in the context of a church where maybe you can't meet, and getting those essentials, that there has been supply chain issues with getting, anything that you need, and I've heard from family that lives in BC as well, that there's those challenges that come with this disruption of connection. You guys are safe and you're doing okay there. How do you manage? You said survival. Connection is survival as well. How are you managing as a family through the challenges now in BC?
Yeah, we're actually okay where we are. So the supply chain disruptions are definitely a thing. You walk into the grocery stores and it's a little alarming, right? Like, and not just because, we definitely saw some people like fearfully hoarding and, and things like that. But the biggest thing that happened was that we had major winds, which resulted in major power outages, which resulted in, grocery stores needing to just throw a lot of food out. And so we're actually okay, but it does make us, think. I was listening to a news interview with somebody who was saying, we can expect more of these. We can expect more landslides, fires, floods, all these kind of things. And so when we travel, we should be thinking of, even if a person from the Okanagan is traveling down to the coast, you shouldn't go on a highway for a number of hours without having a couple days worth of food, without having clothing or blankets for all weather. You should be thinking. And I was thinking, what? Like we're in the year we're in, we're not in like wagon train kind of times where, if you're traveling for a few hours, you need to be thinking about survival. Like this, I honestly thought this sounds like, Little House on the Prairie kind of advice or something like that. We're we need to all of a sudden pack for this stuff. And it's not that I haven't even had in my car like a roadside emergency kit with the solar blanket and the flashlight and the whatever. But it's a little kind of alarming to hear about that kind of stuff. And so when I think about, what has it prompted us to do? It's definitely making me look at the tools that we have available and also just trying to think about, before we hit record, you and I were talking a little bit about managing ourselves and our own, how we're coping, so that we're able to be present for the people who are looking to us for the help that we provide in our days.
Right.
And so, So, I'm thankful that we are doing pretty well, so that I actually do have some capacity to be helping people who are struggling a little more.
Yeah. And we were talking about that, I think, both physically, like what's happening in BC physically right now and with our families right now. At the same time, many people that are listening to this have been through many storms, and I'll use that just as a metaphor for today, and not discounting what's happening there in BC. But the storms of where they're managing teams, they are in some kind of a corporation. They are really doing everything they can to keep the ship afloat. And not that everyone's been hurting, but even in growth with your team, quick growth, or all of a sudden your business is taking off. And I've talked to a couple of colleagues that they did the pivot early on, when shutdowns happened here in COVID, but then exponential growth that they've experienced over this last year, and then managing that and your team within that. Thank you for sharing, because I think that when we really talk about preparing ourselves, and essentially that's maybe what this guy was talking about, is we have the ability to step up to prepare. And I think you mentioned earlier as well, before we hit record, that corporations, teams really can't be putting their stake in the ground in the same way and having that predictability moving forward. So when we're looking at all of these shifts and changes, and we're managing ourselves so that we can take care of our teams, but within that, the corporate environment where we're trying to get things done, the business goals, the events that we want to plan, the people that we need to connect with, how are you seeing that it's working for some of your clients, where you're actually seeing that they're able to manage those shifts and changes in better ways?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think when I think about a few of the clients that I'm working with, so maybe I'll just describe a couple of them and where I see that, because there's some very different, pieces that are going on. I have this mixed up Rubik's Cube beside my computer, and it's mixed up for a couple of reasons. So one is my son mixed it up when he was little, and nobody in my house knows how to fix it. So we're not one of these people who knows how to solve the Rubik's Cube, but I keep it beside my computer because I love it as a metaphor. So, and we've talked about, storms as a metaphor, but this Rubik's Cube is really our organizations, and it's really mixed up right now. And we don't have a good sense of, many of us, of kind of where to start. And if we're going to solve all the sides of the Rubik's Cube to make sure that it's looking beautiful and it's got the right pattern that we want and so on, then we first need to spin it around and kind of look at it from all the sides. Where I see organizations struggling is if they just start turning the Rubik's Cube without having a good look at all the sides. Or maybe even just saying, you know what, we're not going to solve for the whole Rubik's Cube. We're just going to try to get one side, one color, right?
Yeah,
So hopefully people listening are familiar enough with the Rubik's Cube to understand this. But where I see organizations doing well is when they take the time to look to either pop up or zone in, either one, and probably both. Pop up enough to be able to look at as much as they can, and also be able to hone in and go, okay, so if we were to just solve one side, then what are the turns, what are the twists, what are the pieces that we need to solve for in order to accomplish that? Related to that is figuring out what that long view is, and also what the super short view is. There's a lot of data that supports organizations identifying and organizing their work into shorter sprints. And so figuring out, with a long-term view in mind, and kind of, I think all of us are holding that a bit loosely right now, and perhaps more loosely than we ever have before. And that can be very uncomfortable for a lot of people. But if we hold this vision, these values in mind, what is a sprint that we can run that's going to either solve an important problem or accomplish an important goal? And when we focus on that, and then pull together, ideally an interdisciplinary team, or a cross-functional team, or we pull together the people that we're going to need in order to accomplish that, the result often is not only solving that important problem or rallying around an important value, but it's also just super motivating because we can achieve some progress in a time, some tangible progress at a time when it feels like, our roots are shaken, like I think so many of us are just feeling like we don't know what we can count on. Like if I can't count on like the supply chain coming from Vancouver, if I can't count on when I go into a grocery store, if I'm going to be exposed to like a virus, like if I can't count on, like it seems like there's nothing that we counted on, or very little of what we counted on before is it's kind of been shaken. And so rallying around very concrete, very doable, valuable and important shorter term sprints, we're just seeing groups having a lot of success around that. There was this one company that we've been working with for about 7 months, I think. They decided that they were going to take a year to just figure some stuff out. And so they decided a year ago right now, actually, that they were going to be a permanently hybrid organization. They said the genie's out of the bottle. We're not putting it back in. Like, if people are set up at home, then we know we're not going to be able to bring everybody into the office. And so they said, if this is going to be our long-term plan, then we're going to allow ourselves a year to figure this out. And so what's interesting is that the questions that they had back in the spring are not the same questions they have now. And by just allowing themselves some time and some space to, first of all, not have all the answers, but probably more importantly, not even know all the right questions. They came up with a list of, I think they said 72 things that they thought they should address, some small, some big, but that they should address in order to, get to their desired state, what they thought they could project ahead to. But what happened was that they were all excited when they went away to come up with the list. But when the list came back with 72 things that they were going to do, like, honestly, they felt so defeated before they could even start. And so the next piece of work was, where's either the biggest impact or the lowest hanging fruit? Because our motivation was to get more motivation. We needed to have a quick win. We needed to feel some progress. And we needed to figure out where could they experience success and impact related to their efforts as quickly as possible.
And I love what you're saying in the holding the goals. So at the beginning, they gave themselves a year, which isn't a sprint.
No.
But when you're talking about these sprints that can happen in the midst of that, where you are, if the motivator is to get more motivation, and the motivation will create that momentum, and you start seeing the wins over time, month over month, I can imagine a year later, which you're at now, a year later, there will be things to celebrate. And probably I would guess, and did this happen, that some of those 72 things just became either irrelevant, or they're off the list, or they're just not something that they want to put time and energy, money towards.
Totally. Yeah. And so by focusing in, then and just allowing some, natural sort of prioritizing, absolutely that happened. And, and then I think about another client that we've been working with, and we're about 3/4 of the way through the project that they engaged us for. And they wanted our help with their processes, and in particular, their meetings.
Interesting.
So, and so they said, meetings have been such a critical way of us getting our work done and us focusing. But if we're working apart, if we can't count on being able to meet physically together, if we can't, we know that there are tools that are available to us, and we just need some help figuring out how to leverage those tools best. And so, on the face of it, it was a very technical request, just research into what kind of work they do and understanding how they do it, and where are the pain points and where could they find efficiencies. And we brought in experts to help with that technical side, but just like the Rubik's Cube, they were focused on this one side, but we can't get the colors all on one side without looking at all the other sides still. We still need to look at all the other sides. And so what happened was that, and we knew this going in, that while the intervention was around their meetings, the project was actually all about how they did their sync and async communication. So how they communicated when they were live and together, and how they communicated when they were not necessarily in the same place at the same time. Embedded within that is just even how their team is formed and performs. And so, a key piece of the project is coming up with those agreements as a team about what are you working on and why, and what are the ways that you want to work together. Meetings are just a tool. They're just one tool that can enable collaboration. And so there's so many other ways of collaborating or ways of communicating that can happen that don't require a meeting. And
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you're naturally coming to this as somebody that you see the benefit of connection, you see the benefit of collaboration and the myriad of ways that we can collaborate with each other. I think collaboration can lead to deeper connection. I don't necessarily think that they're the same thing. What is it about sort of where you've come from, what's important to you, how you grew up, that has led you to this place where now this is just part of what you do, but I think it's also part of who you are? Did you see that in your past where people would recognize that in you when you were younger too?
Yeah. It's interesting. My brain started going down one path, and then you said, when you grew up, and then my brain went somewhere else. So I mean, my family moved quite a bit when I was like in my earliest years. And so we actually moved pretty much once a year, like for a while. And what I learned was how to survive socially in new environments. And it really was kind of survival.
Yeah.
So, very briefly, like there in every elementary school classroom, there was a popular girl, there was a popular boy, there was and there was often there was a mean girl and a nice girl, right? And so as a kid showing up in a classroom, I wasn't totally aware of it right away, like at a cognitive level, except that I recall, and until I recall when I was aware. I remember I spotted the mean girl, and I remember having this thought of, there you are, and feeling relieved. Because I needed to know where the power was. I needed to know, like, basically how to navigate some of the social dynamics. And I also knew I needed to find the nice one who was going to help me find my locker, find my classroom, find the bathroom, right? Like, help me figure out, like, eat their lunch with me, like, all that kind of stuff. And so I was aware of these dynamics, but I never really had deep friendships, like, until we stayed in a place for a while. And once we stayed in a place for a while, then, I mean, I was sort of aware that there were these friendships, but I'd never experienced it beyond my family. I think in terms of who I am and what I bring, I think I bring both of those perspectives. Like, I have this sky high sensitivity for, like, the new person in a team, for the new person in a room, for, like, and just what that can look and feel like as we add new team members to our view. And on the other side, I know that, so when I started in self-employment, I mean, the biggest risk for me wasn't, like, do I think I can get clients, or do I think I can be successful as an entrepreneur? I strangely didn't really worry about that. What I worried about was, how am I gonna make sure that my mental health stays okay if I don't have a team, if I don't have, like, a place where I belong, if I don't have a place that I can sort of have that peer support and that work friend. Because I know that sense of connection is, like, once I experienced friendship and connection and somebody having my back and me having theirs, and all that kind of stuff. Like, I've experienced having it, and I've experienced not having it. And so I knew that I needed to find, and I went hard, like on trying to find those places where I could belong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting when you started right off the top of this recording and I asked you what connection meant to you, and almost without even thinking, you said survival. And thinking about where you were as a kid, reintroduced to a new class, you've got new books, you've got a new bag, you're trying to sort of show up as you, I'm sure, or whatever that looked like for you. But you're immediately scoping the room and figuring out, how do I survive? How do I make this work? How do I stay, and not even just physically safe, but how am I going to make it through emotionally and mentally? And what an incredible thing that you have really used that background that you've had. And now, like you say, you're really aware of the new person on a team. But I would guess even as things are shifting and changing within a current team, you're able to spot the difference. You're able to see, what is it that we need to pay attention here so that we stay on track, so things keep moving, so that we're making a difference and we're getting to the goals that we've put in motion.
Yeah. Yeah. And Lisa, it does remind me of virtual distance research, and it reminds me of the stuff. So for listeners, Dr. Karen Sabel Lejeski, she started some research years ago and did it across a number of countries, number of sectors, number of positions. And her research was looking at the impact of distance on productivity and happiness. And what her research revealed is that there's different kinds. First of all, there's different kinds of distance, and the least impactful for productivity and happiness is actually physical distance. Physical distance is the least of our worries. So,
really? That's amazing.
I know. And so, and what her research found is that, so there were a couple of pieces of this. And so I know, Lisa, you picked up the book, and I definitely recommend anybody to watch her YouTubes, find her stuff, because it's totally worth it. But she looked at physical distance, she looked at operational distance, and she looked at affinity distance. And so I like alliteration, and also those are big words. So I like to just simplify it a little bit to people, place, and process. So when we think about the place, you and I live in different cities. And so we are physically apart. We don't work in the same or live in the same physical space. So that's the physical distance. The second one, operational or process distance, is the distance that's created by our processes. So you and I were sharing that we had a calendar invite that had an automatic Zoom link in it that had and so that's process distance. That's how many clicks does it take before I get there? How many, if I'm buying a ticket to an event, how do I have to drive into a place, or can I do it online? The distance that we have to go in our processes is what's referred to when we look at our process or our operational distances. The third distance is affinity, or our people distance. And so affinity meaning like that interdependence, belonging, that sense of connection. And together, those combine into what she talks about as being virtual distance. But before we talk about the virtual distance, when we unpack the impact of those other three, people, place, and process, what her research found is that physical distance is only half as impactful as operational or process distance. That when we're talking about productivity and happiness, there is double the impact of operational distance to productivity and happiness than us being physically apart. And then affinity distance, or when we feel distance as people, when we feel like we're not connected, that's double again. And so the distance that we experience when we don't feel connected is 4 times more impactful on measures of productivity and happiness than physical distance.
Amazing.
And double that of operational distance. And so what do we do with that? It really is the case for connection. It is the case for, if we want productivity and happiness, which I think most businesses, organizations, do, we know the case for that, I hope. But if we want that, then how do we accomplish it? Especially when we don't have the benefit of that physical space connection. And often, a lot of what we can accomplish is in closing some of that operational or process distance. So if we take an example, So if you and I are planning a thing and you're in another province, another part of the world than I am. And if we say for the next 3 weeks, we're going to focus on planning this one thing. So, coming back to those sprints again, we're going to solve this problem. We're going to plan this thing. We're going to focus on this one little goal, or this one of the 72 things. We're going to focus on that. By working shoulder to shoulder, even virtually, on closing operational distance and improving process distance, then what happens when we work together on stuff? We get to know each other. We build some trust. We gain that experience together. We even start to share some jokes, maybe, or we share what we're reading, or we meet once and then we meet again and we go, "It was your birthday last week. How was your birthday dinner?" And before we get to work on the thing, we start to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the quickest ways to close that affinity distance is actually by attending to our operational or process distances. And so it's like a twofer. and our families love good deals.
Yeah.
It's a good deal.
You're speaking my language. We could honestly, I'm just soaking this in because I am such a firm believer that when we talk about connection, it's so much deeper than we think. What if you were to leave something that you have learned through your life or your work for the people that are listening? So the ones that are planning that event from the side of their desks, they're managing teams. Some people that we work with, they run dozens or hundreds of events in a year, or meetings or gatherings of some kind. What would you say as an encouragement to them when they're starting to work differently in 2022 with their teams? The studies that you're talking about have been for years. This, it wasn't necessarily built on the challenges of COVID. It just amplified the message. So what could you leave with us that we can really start implementing today?
Yeah, I would say ensure that you're staying true and holding firm to why you're doing what you're doing and to the outcomes that you're trying to accomplish. So that why and for what reason, just not just why you're doing it, but the change you're hoping to see, and hold a little more loosely to the how.
Yeah. Even that, right? Like if we could be conscious and aware of approaching our challenges in that way, we will see wins, and we're going to see things that will move in a direction that energizes us. And if we commit to that, I will encourage all of you. And if anyone out there is listening and you'd like to share some of those wins when you start putting that in motion, I'd love to hear. How can people continue a conversation with you if they'd like to? Where can they find you, Candace?
You can find me on LinkedIn for sure. I'm there and love to connect and to have conversations with people. I love meeting new people.
And you are good at it. Having heard your story of when you were a kid for the first time today. Thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate this. And we'll add all sorts of great links so everyone can get connected to you and the work you do, and a fascinating way of looking at connection. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.